Dratnos, do you know in patch 9.2 we're getting adamant vaults added to Torghast?
Oh my goodness, I cannot wait.
Did you know that inside of the adamant vaults there's going to be a lot of nothing? All right, so there's some new vaults, though, that are coming in patch 10.0.7 that have nothing to do with the adamant vaults, actually.
Yeah, and which has also nothing to do with Korthia, but we've got that's a little bit of a... I guess you could compare it to Korthia, perhaps, in some ways, but well, I don't know. I don't think in the bad ways. But yeah, so the Ziskera vaults are coming in 10.0.7, which are not really Torghasty. It's a pretty different system from that. And notably, almost everything we're going to talk about in this video today, all the 10.0.7 content, is pretty self-contained to 10.0.7. And at least in this blue post, they've said the design goal is to not have it be relevant into 10.1 for very long. So it's not supposed to be in the way that Torghast was extremely relevant, right? And Korthia was extremely relevant for like your character's power level in those patches. This time around, it's more of like a brief little content hit that can power you up during 10.07, but not beyond it is the goal.
I do think that there have been some people who have been comparing this to Korthia and to like Shards of Domination and stuff like that. And we're going to talk about basically what the system is, what Blizzard has clarified with the system, and kind of how it works. So immediately, right off the rip, there was a blue post. Blizzard actually got out in front of this one. So there were some primordial stones that got data mined off of Wowhead that had some specific effects. There wasn't a ton of information in regards to like what was going to happen with like just 10.0.7 stuff in this, especially these primordial stones. And so people were really worried that these were going to be similar to Shards of Domination. That was the immediate concern. Then Blizzard again clarifies with this blue post that talks about in questing in 10.0.7, you'll unlock the Ziskera Vaults, which is a solo instanceable dungeon with some fun puzzles to solve, and so it's like self-contained content. And as you venture through, you'll acquire onyx amulet rings and a bunch of primordial stones that can be socketed into it, and these stones have trinket-like effects, and some also work together to create some spicy combinations.
Yeah, so the Ziskera Vaults are in the Forbidden Reach. The Forbidden Reach is the Korthia, right? It's the new zone that comes out during this patch. If you have leveled an Evoker, it's the Evoker starting area, but it's being filled up with rares and Primal Storms events and those sorts of things, treasures, and you get access to the Ziskera Vaults through keys that are bind on account that drop from the Forbidden Reach. So then you run the Ziskera Vaults, and each key can let you unlock a different door, and that will let you find Primordial Stones.
Yes.
And those Primordial Stones, then you can socket 3 of them into your Amulet, which is that ring. The ring starts at 405 and scales up to 424 based on the upgrades of the gems of the stones that are within it, which you also upgrade by like crushing gems you don't want and then upgrading the ones you do want.
And in addition to that, the keys to get into the Ziskera Vaults are also bind on account immediately, so you can either funnel the keys to an alt that is potentially starting to get this amulet ring, or potentially even getting primordial stones or stuff like that, or you can just funnel them off of your alt accounts onto your mains if you do get them while you're doing some content in the Forbidden Reach.
Yeah, you are still... So the bind on account nature of that, it's nice little quality of life. It's not a huge reduction in the amount of work that alts have to do, because you still have to run the same total amount. Like, if you want a second character, it still needs to run double the Ziskera Vault, so you need to find double the keys. You can just find them instead of needing to grind Forbidden Reach on each of your characters. You can do it on whatever mix of characters you most prefer to get the keys that you want, right? But yeah, it's a nice little quality of life thing that doesn't always exist with systems like this.
Okay,
and then you get the stones and you upgrade them and there are a lot of different stones with a lot of different types of effects.
Okay, so before we go over the stones real quick, I think that reading this bottom blurb is actually really important. Our intent here is to minimize the random outcomes that you can customize and experiments with your amulet, similar to the Mechagon Trinket, the pocket-sized computation device. Being able to upgrade your favorite stones will also increase the item level of the ring up to 424, allowing its power to scale in a deterministic way. Again, of course, given its maximum item level, we will expect that you'll replace it with something better in Dragonflight Season 2. The pocket-sized computation device was the item that you had, if you remembered, like Mechagon dailies, you would put like the punch cards inside of them. A lot of people use like Cyclotronic Blast, but you in reality could have used a bunch of different punch cards modifiers. Now, let's go ahead and look at some of those punch card modifiers that we have, which are the Primal Stone effect, or Primordial Stone effects.
So right off the bat, there's a lot of these different effects, and it's unclear which of them are going to be the best ones, but they are situational in a lot of cases, right? So like we see a kind of usual mix of defensive, offensive, but then there's ones that are AoE, right? We've got the prodigious sand one that says being near 3 enemies stirs up a sandstorm, dealing nature damage to nearby enemies, right? So being near 3 enemies, AoE type effect. There's standing still for 3 seconds increases your armor and auto attack damage, right? So like depending on the size of that could be good for different specs, right? The receiving heals can exude steam, healing yourself and 2 nearby allies. I mean, there's a lot of different effects here. Successful interrupts exhale smoke, dealing fire damage to enemies in front of you. Notably as well, there's this one that seems pretty cool, is damaging enemies from your primordial stones trigger your healing effects, and vice versa. That's the prophetic twilight stone near the bottom.
Prophetic twilight stone. Okay, yeah, here we go.
Yeah, so like that, I don't know, like there's some interesting thinking to be done about which of these are good. I suspect there will end up being some pretty clear best ones that will work for many specs, but some of these do change value pretty dramatically depending on which spec you're in, right? Like which class you're playing. Like the Humming Arcane Stone, dealing magic damage, can fire arcane missiles for each kind of magic you've used in the past 20 seconds. That's potentially like 5 times better for some specs than it is for others, right? And so
like this,
depending on the base number,
the successful interrupt one, obviously this is going to be good for like, you know, enhancement shamans or something like that, where they have a short interrupt duration, and then on top of that they're in melee, and so they're going to be able to like, obviously it's going to be more in plus focused, but again, there's a lot of different situations that different stones can be good, assuming that they're balanced relative to one another. And I'm kind of interested in seeing like how strong these are realistically going to be. Like, what is the power gain that we're going to be seeing out of them? We already have like a pretty strong couple of rings from the raid in both the Aeronog ring and the Broodkeeper ring. The Aeronog ring for some specs does around 2% of their damage.
And if you're playing one of the specs that has a hard time activating the Aeronog ring, your other ring could be an amulet with the Flame-Licked Stone in it. Dealing damage can set the enemy on fire, dealing fire damage over time, right?
Wait a second. Okay, I didn't even think about this.
That's an Aeronog or Broodkeeper ring activator. And there are a couple effects like that. There's a Flame-Licked Stone, the Freezing Ice Stone, that are just like dealing damage, can do more damage. There's a chance that those will just be the best all-around effects. Hopefully, though, there's cases where the situational ones are instead worth using, but at least hopefully also slotting in those kind of default always good ones will be fine, and something you can do if you're not interested in engaging with the system too much, because, you know, it could be kind of annoying, especially the bag space implications here of this could also be somewhat annoying this patch.
Yeah, okay, you're making a really good point. Not one that I had considered. Acquisition of these actually looks a little bit easier than acquisition of systems like this in the past, right? One of the things that they talk about is like you can use these fragments to purchase. Okay, we're going back to the blue post here, I guess. I should probably say that. You can crush your primordial stones into fragments, which can be repurposed into an item to upgrade your favorite stones through your local jewel crafter. And then you can also use these fragments to purchase newer stones from a researcher. While you can't buy specific stones, they come in families, so you'll be able to target the stones that you want. So I guess it's not super clear how it's working, but I suspect there's gonna be like, you know, like arcane stones, there's gonna be like fell stones, there's gonna be like fire stones, and so you're gonna be looking to purchase families of stones like that. And so the acquisition process does seem like it's a lot more easier than I need to kill 10 bosses from the raid every single week and pray that I get three gems that are the exact same type to work to activate my 4 set. Or whatever. Yeah,
I mean, it's possible, like, the way that this, depending on the numbers of fragments needed to upgrade here, it may be a case of, like, oh, wow, I need to get, like, 1,000 total stones to crush most of them into fragments to upgrade so that I have 1 of each at the full rank or something like that. But that's going to be a pretty serious endeavor for pretty seriously diminishing returns, right? Like, most people will probably be able to get by upgrading 3 to 7 stones to max level, and then just using them would be my guess, and not really worrying about too many of these other ones. But, you know, if you are interested in being fully min-maxed, even though they say that their intention is for you to replace it with something better in Dragonflight Season 2, there are often cases with systems like this where it's actually quite relevant for early Mythic raid progression, and for the first couple of months, if you're, you know, using a system like this, There's been systems like Benthic Gear in the past, like old tier sets in the past, where grinding the best possible version of that in the previous patch was actually a pretty good use of time.
Benthic was self-contained.
For the next patch.
Benthic was self-contained inside the same patch, but it was like external gear was relevant for like that patch, I guess, technically.
Yeah, exactly. It was it was not designed to. I don't think it was their intention for the Benthic Gear to be like better than Mythic Gear.
I kind of expect that we're going to be flush with stones, the primordial stones. It seems like you're going to be getting a decent amount of them, at least in some capacity. They
come from the Zeskara vaults, and the Zeskara vaults keys come from doing rares and treasures in
which are on a daily
reach, right?
Which the rares are on a daily reset, right?
Yeah, so it's not like you'll be flush with them just by doing you have to be doing the Outdoor World content to be flush with them. So if you're the kind of person who logs in only for keystones or for raid or for M+ or for PvP or whatever, this is a system where in order to get the full value out of your ring, you are going to have to add back in some of that flying around and killing rares gameplay that is reminiscent of Korthia. But yeah, the good news is that you don't necessarily have to do this. Like there's a chance, and if you're being super optimal, you probably do want to engage the system just in case it is good for next tier, but it's not a system that, like Shards of Domination, is with the tier and is definitely super bis. It's like, at best, maybe this ring is like a few % upgrade over the heroic ring out of the raid or something.
It is going to be kind of weird because the amulet itself doesn't have any secondary stats on it. This potentially puts it in a situation where even if you get it up to 424, it might be, I don't want to say easily replaceable, but it might be replaceable by another ring like in the next tier fairly fast, depending on how much damage these are giving.
Yeah, it's tough, right? Because like, if the effects are replaceable for some specs with like a 430 ring, then they're possibly replaceable for other specs that scale harder with secondaries with like a 400 ring, right? And so it's possible there would be some specs that just wouldn't even want the amulet at all. That's the thing, right? It's like when you have an item like this with no secondaries, it's going to be really hard for this to be equally valuable for all the different specs. So my guess is that the best way to do this would be to err on the side of the stone effects being a little bit better than a 424 ring, and then nerf it moderately when 10.1 comes out, so that it's not actually going to be continue to be bis over the raid rings. But that sort of plan is not something that they like to do unless they're forced to. So we'll see how they decide to go about it.
You and I have spoken about this. I mean, more often than not, I'm kind of okay with them doing stuff like that, where they present something, and the system would be cool, assuming that these effects feel impactful, important, and fun, right? Like you don't want to be grinding them, especially for 10.0.7. But like if they are adding some level to your gameplay that is important or like is fun in some way, I think that that's like a major success for them, even to the point where they would have to nerf them, because that happens sometimes where, 4 sets, they're designed well, but they're a little bit too strong or a little bit too polarizing, and they have to nerf them. And that, if that happened here too, I think that's also okay.
Ajar's Font of Power, another good example of an item that would have been good if they just nerfed that going into Nihilotha, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that Blizzard should be allowed to make cool and fun stuff, and they shouldn't feel bad about having to nerf it after that patch is over, and I think that that's fine.
Yeah.
Okay, the last little bit of stuff that we had in regards to 10.0.7 news was there was I won't say a lot, but there was a decent amount of class changes. There was a little bit to Death Knight. I think that Paladin and Shaman got the most changes, though. Paladin getting fairly large ones, which also caused a little bit of strife in the community, specifically this Retribution Aura one. And it's super unclear how this is going to work for a couple of reasons, but I'll just read out what they have in this blue post. This is an official Blizzard blue post, and they say that Retribution Aura has been redesigned and now grants 5% increased damage and healing for 10 seconds to all party or raid members whenever a party or raid member within 40 yards takes more than 50% of their health and damage. This can occur once every 30 seconds. And so a lot of people, at least in the community, were looking at this and they're like, okay, now I have to have 1 Paladin for Devo Aura and 1 Paladin for Retribution Aura. They also had a blurb down here at the bottom where Retribution Aura in Dragonflight has functioned only as a personal throughput benefit to Paladins and locking them out of using their other auras during gameplay. We're looking to change that, so now Retribution Aura grants increased damage and healing for 10 seconds to raid members, blah, 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 blah. And then in addition to that, Retribution Paladins will receive a baseline passive. Whenever a party or raid member dies within 40 yards, you gain Avenging Wrath. So this is kind of similar to what they already have.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of people misinterpret this as like a Ret Pally is going to be required as well. Ret Aura is not a Ret Pally specific aura. And in fact, maybe best played on a Holy Paladin with Aura Mastery, depending on how exactly that ends up working out. But yes, this does seem to have that kind of raid buff sized impact of 1.5% raid DPS will be represented by your paladin pressing that aura button. And that is usually enough to mean that it's worth fitting that into your comp, right? If you are pushing against the kind of content where it's like our comp matters. Obviously, there's a lot of groups that's not the case for, groups that can get by without a demon hunter, that kind of stuff as well. And those groups won't feel a huge change here. But if you are one of the players that's trying to push the content at the level where these sorts of things matter, it is very good news if you are a paladin player. You know, the raid spots for you are now much more locked in. But if you are one of those shamans or DKs or evokers in a tier where they don't make Razageth, and you're kind of looking, Hunter, you're just looking there, you're like, well, instead of competing for like 4 flex raid spots, now there are 3.
Yeah, I mean, that's so tough because like whenever more raid, I mean, we've made videos about raid buffs a couple times. Whenever more of them are added, it just ends up having some classes feel more and more left out because there is no parity. Not every class does have a raid buff. And now we're getting into a territory of like, what is a healer composition going to look like? Because Devo Aura has almost exclusively been brought by a Holy Paladin since it's been introduced. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I'm pretty sure it's at the high level, it's always been played by a Holy Paladin.
Yeah, exactly. So at the high level, Devo Aura has always been brought by a Holy Paladin, and now since you have a second aura that is required, is that going to just be a second Holy Paladin? Like, is this going to restrict the healing comp even more in a way that, like, okay, so for like this season, we saw the healing comp be pretty restricted. It seemed like a lot of people didn't necessarily want to be running Priest, but they needed Fortitude, and so that was pretty good. In addition to that, it seemed like maybe Holy Paladin wasn't the greatest healer. Now, this is like up for debate, but it seemed like Holy Paladin maybe wasn't the greatest healer, and they could have potentially gotten the auras from other places, like those 2 buffs from other places, but they were kind of locked in because they didn't want to play a red or a shadow or a prot paladin, right? Now, is this going to force you to run double Holy Paladin again just because that's the cheapest way of getting your raid buff? Or maybe, I guess, a prot paladin could bring it?
Yeah, also the ability to aura mastery the ret aura might mean that this functions as a little bit of a DPS buff to what the Holy Paladins are bringing, in the same sort of way that like Power Infusion is a big damage gain that the priests bring that isn't seen on their damage meters. That's going to be true for Holy Paladin, potentially aura mastery, ret aura. I'm not sure exactly how this is going to work out, but
we'll see.
I don't know. I mean, I do think that what Blizzard are generally doing here with Paladin of like reworking ret and looking at this stuff, taking away Seraphim, these sorts of things, I like what they're going with that. But yeah, the raid buff situation is increasingly bad every time they add a new one until all the specs that don't have it have one. Once we get to a world of like, okay, there's a reason to bring a hunter, then like, okay, I'm back to being.
I just continue to worry about it. I continue to worry more and more about the Death Knights, the hunters, the shamans, right? Where it's just like, well, what are they bringing? Like there is no mandatory slot for them, so they are fighting against. Okay, so the first 12 slots of your composition are locked up. Then there are the rest of the classes, including second copies of the first characters, that are battling for the other 8. And you're just like, oh god, all right, that's so tough. Okay, another, I guess a couple other hot topics. Prot Paladin got a little bit of a rework. You want to cover this a little bit? Yeah,
so basically the tree for Prot Pally, based off of these changes, they weren't necessarily all targeted at Prot, but some of them were class-based changes as well, with Divine Toll and Seraphim and stuff getting messed around with. And the end result of this has been that the Prot talent tree is looking a little bit more cursed than it used to. So a nerf to the spec, an effective nerf to the spec if it goes live like this, and certainly a nerf to how fun it is to build a talent tree as a Prot Pally, and how much getting good stuff that you want is possible on that tree. So hopefully that's something that they look at, because I doubt that was intended. But as of right now, that's the impact of the changes to the class and spec trees there. We've also seen Frost DK getting some changes that are, I think, much more universally positive across their tree. They're getting a lot of good stuff just baked in, and are going to be getting effectively a bunch of new talent tree or talent points as a result. Shaman are getting some changes as well to a few different specs here, but I also think this looks largely good.
Most of the stuff most of the changes to Shaman have been largely targeted at restoration, basically since the expansions come out. They buffed the hell out of Acid Rain, and then they're like,
Okay, a little nerfer. Yeah, I mean that thing is doing a lot of damage right now. But I mean, it's good. It's nice that Resto has something that's going for them now.
Some of the biggest stuff that I've seen talked about with like Resto Shaman is like Ancestral Awakening and Ancestral Guidance now contributing to Cloudburst Totem healing. That seems like that's actually going to be a fairly solid change for Shaman. A lot of the issues have been inside of their tree, just generally, and Blizzard is continuing to change up their tree a little bit to try to make it a little bit more to where they don't have dead nodes. I think that that's been the biggest issue with Resto Shamans. They have to pass through a lot of dead nodes has been most of the issues that I've heard about with Arshan.
And then finally, we saw a nice little change to Monk as well. Sky Touch got added as an option against Sky Reach, which means that you're now going to have an option. So if you haven't played with or as a Windwalker this expansion, there's this talent that does a bunch of damage for them that's called Sky Reach. It's a huge damage loss to not take, but it charges you to your target, and it does it in a pretty annoying way on some encounters as well, like second boss Quarter Stars. It's hard to avoid charging into the fire. Senarth, Razageth, right? You get yourself into trouble with that talent. So they've added a option that has the exact same text but doesn't have the charge, and now you can choose between the two. It's nice as well. I think it's really good that they are keeping the Sky Reach option for players and fights that you want it, and then making it not mandatory. I think this is such a fantastic way to address this.
I mean, so overall, that's kind of all the 10.0.7 stuff that we've gotten so far. Is like Forbidden
Reach. A few more
Reach
class changes we didn't go through, but they're
minor.
Really, they're
minor more often than not. I think overall, though, this has actually been pretty good. I think that the pacing of the expansion has been one that I've been pretty happy with, but with what we have in 10.0.5, a couple of class changes coming out. In addition to that, they've had like the trading posts and stuff like that. It's been mostly well received. 10.0.7, we're getting a new zone. Primordial Stones and Primordial Gems, I think, which, they look cool. I hope they play well. I'm really interested.
This is a lot of content for a minor patch, right? Like a new zone, new stuff to do.
Yeah.
And like it's going to be for like 2 months or something, right? Tops, and then 10.1 comes out and presumably will obsolete most of this. So it's cool. I'm excited about the pace of content. It does have some interesting implications as well for like, is season 1 still going to be ongoing? Are all the top keys going to be timed using Onyx Amulets? Is that going to kind of obsolete the previous key pushing work that's been happening? All that stuff. You know what is going to go on with that? But that could be a topic for a future video when we see actually what they do.
I think even if it does, it's probably fine. Like, I'm not super worried about them like doing stuff like that.
Definitely worth
on the 5th month of the season or the 4th month of the season or something like that. It's totally fine. Cool. All right, so we're gonna be back next week. We'll see you guys then. I hope you guys all have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you guys later. Bye.